Pulse post-game show. I'm your host, John Serenitas, and as always, I'm joined by my partner, John Lyons. John, well, we don't usually talk football this early in the day, but we are now after the Patriots' 32-16 loss to the Jacksonville Jaguars in London. And needless to say, my friend, this started off great. It looked like this was going to be their second win of the season. They were going to snap their 5-game losing streak. And then we got a reminder of just how bad things are right now. They implode in the second quarter, and Jacksonville runs them over the rest of the way en route to their second win of the season. Early thoughts on this one?
It's funny, John. We've talked football in the afternoon, in the evening, on Thursday night, now Sunday morning, and it's kind of been the same theme most of the year here. A lot of bad football, unfortunately. You mentioned that second quarter. I mean, I think we all almost forgot. Patriots are up 10-0 in this game and look good. They get outscored 22-3 overall in the second quarter, and it felt almost uncompetitive after that. And I know they mounted the touchdown drive in the fourth quarter to at least put the game. It was a 9-point game, put it in reach. But I mean, Jacksonville at one point ran, I think it was 18 consecutive run plays, and it felt like there was not much the Patriots could do to stop it defensively. Offensively, I thought you had some good moments, especially those 2 touchdown drives, but then you had some big drops by receivers. I thought some inconsistent play calling as well. You gave up, and how many times have we talked about this? A major special teams gaffe, a punt return touchdown, which to me really swung the entire game at that point. So unfortunately, John, this was a game when you get up 10-0, you think, all right, this is a very winnable game against a, I guess, sneaky talented Jaguars team, because now they're only 2-5, but they do have talent there. But then you just implode again. And I think it speaks to the roster. I think it speaks to the coaching staff. And I think it just speaks to the general execution. Just unfortunately, John, a lot of negatives to go around today.
Yeah, I agree. And you know, you blow a 10-0 lead. And the thing is, when I look at this game, you blow the 10-0 lead, and it really it speaks to the fact that you didn't play well in all 3 phases after the first quarter. Offense really struggled. They couldn't really get anything going. It's amazing to me, John, that Drake May's final line, 26 of 37, 276, 2 touchdown passes. On the surface, you look at that and you say, well, he played well enough for them to win, passer rating of 109. But then the reality is a lot of that came in the second half when they were playing from behind. Your defense is awful right now, and I want to get into that because there's an interesting number that you and I were chatting about before we went live. Defense is just terrible. They have completely fallen apart. And then you give up the 96-yard punt return. So you lost this game in all 3 phases. You got outplayed in all 3 phases, and you got outplayed by a team that I agree with you is sneaky talented, but they're also a team where their coach is on the hot seat. They've underachieved. They paid their quarterback this offseason. He's not playing up to his salary. They're a mess. And yet somehow a game that you should have won, and yes, I'm going to say that on paper, Patriots going into this one should have won this game. And the reason I say that is it was set up for you to win. Worst secondary in the league. Your young quarterback has proven, granted it's 1 start, but he proved last week that he can consistently throw the ball. Opportunity to build on that going up against his secondary. A defensive line that has underachieved all year, opportunity to run the football. Defensively, a quarterback that's been skittish in the pocket. He's been hit a bunch despite playing behind a good offensive line. Their running game's been good. Outside of Brian Thomas, Gabe Davis, Christian Kirk have done nothing. But yet somehow when you play this Patriots team, they have now become the elixir, right? It used to be, all right, who are the Patriots going to play if they were scuffling here and there under Belichick and Brady? Who were they going to play to get right? Oh, the Buffalo Bills or the New York Jets. They were the elixir. Well, now the Patriots are the elixir. The shoe's on the other foot.
Yeah, I agree. And we were talking off air before the show. This is the 4th time already the Patriots have lost by double digits this year. As bad as things were last year, John, 5 losses all of last year by double digits. So that was when you had the worst quarterback play in the NFL. I mean, you go back to last year, you mentioned defensively. Their defense played well enough, and I know this is going to sound hyperbolic. Their defense played well enough for them to win 8 to 9 games last year. I mean, you think about some of those, the Philly 1 possession loss, the Miami 1. We don't have to relitigate all of them. Even Buffalo, when they turned the ball over 4 times in the first 20 minutes and they only lost by 6, like a 6-0 game to the Chargers last year. So point being, your defense was really good all year and consistently played well enough for you to win. This year, I think, John, our main focus has been on the offensive line and how bad that has been in the offense. Over the past 4 to 5 weeks, defense has been just as bad and in some cases worse. I mean, you give up 32 points today. Granted, 7 of them were due to a punt return, but still 25 to a team that had been struggling a lot on your defense. You give up 41 last week to Houston. You get smoked by San Francisco, take the pick six out of it, and you still gave up a bunch of big plays. The Jets did whatever they want against you on a Thursday night as well. So this defense, look, I know Barmore's not there, and I know Judon's not there. But we could sit here last year and say Gonzalez missed most of the year. Judon missed most of the year last year, and they were still top 5 in a lot of categories, top 10 in pretty much every category overall. And this defense it's a real problem right now. And again, your point, you started off this game they should have won. If they just played like the 12th or 13th best defense in the league today, they probably win this game. But they just felt like there were long stretches, big play after big play, or just couldn't stop Jacksonville at all.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. And again, I think you bring up a great point about the defense. I mean, you are playing with 2 of your key guys for the majority of last season, and we're playing competitive defense. Yeah. You're playing with a couple of your key, you're playing without, rather, I should say, a couple of your key guys this season. And through 7 games, you're not playing competitive defense. And I think that's the problem here, is that despite the fact that they went 4-13 last year, the defense kept them in a lot of those games and enabled them to win a couple of those games down the stretch. This defense is not only not keeping you in games, they're giving you no chance. With a young quarterback and an offense that is struggling to find consistency up front, you need your defense to carry the day. They're not proving that they can do that. So we'll see if that changes as we go along here. I suspect it probably won't. You are watching Patriots Pulse postgame show. I'm John Cernitas. As always, I'm joined by my partner, WEI's John Lyons. Just as a reminder, we know you're getting ready for the 1 o'clock games. We know it's a beautiful day out there, 70 degrees, gorgeous day. Patriots are done playing, so I'm sure a lot of people are out and about trying to enjoy what will probably be the last great stretch of weather we're going to have until the spring. But if you're out and about and you're watching in the car, or you're listening to us, you have it on in the car, feel free to join the conversation. As always, we are live on our YouTube page, our Facebook page, our X account, and on Twitch. So again, feel free to join the conversation. We would love to hear from you about today's 32-16 loss to the Jacksonville Jaguars. And you get Ramondre Stevenson back today, John, and the running game was non-existent. Yeah. Part of the problem is 7th different offensive line combination for the Patriots this season, which I don't know if anybody has ever kept records of that, but that's got to be a record.
Yeah. And it really, once Layden Robinson went down, it was really, you were playing with your 8th combination, right? At that point in City.
Yeah, so next week it'll be 9, depending on what happens.
Yeah.
It's not good. And you know that's wearing on Mayo and the coaching staff. But the reality is, and we're going to talk plenty about this between now and April, they've got to figure it out. They've got to figure out a way, I should say, to fix it. Running game, though, didn't come through for you today. Up 10-0. They only rushed for 38 yards. So you get Ramondre Stevenson back, but collectively they only rushed for 38 yards. Again, I mean, this is what's frustrating about this football team. When you go up 10-0, yeah, your defense gives up the score. It's a 10-7 game now. But that's where you need your running game to balance things up a little bit, open up your passing game, your screen game, get those guys going. Stevenson had a couple of nice runs, but nothing to write home about. And at the end of the day, again, this is the problem with this football team. And I think it's twofold here, John, because on the one hand, they're not good enough. Let's just be real here. They're not good enough, plain and simple. On paper, they're the worst football team in the league, maybe outside of Carolina. They'd probably give them a run for their money. But here's the other problem, though. You have spent a lot of money to re-up a lot of these guys. So this football team that we've had to live through the last 2 years, this is going to be your core for the next 2 years after this one, and in some cases beyond. And so, here we are talking about, okay, how can you support Drake May? What can you put around him at receiver, the offensive line? John, I think it runs deeper than that. You're going to also have to start to think about, what are you doing with this defense? Because clearly they were good last year in spots, and I think a lot of that was Bill Belichick. He's gone now. You jettisoned him. So now it's not only do you need to figure out the offensive line and beef up the receiver core, you have to start thinking about, what do you do at linebacker? Their linebacking core is not good enough. They benched Raekwon McMillan today. What do you do at edge? They have no ability to generate pressure whatsoever unless they bring it. And even in the secondary, you've said this all season, and I agree with you, they're a corner short. So this team has a lot of holes.
Yeah, and I think defensively, this is what concerns me, John, is Christian Barmore is a great player, probably a top 5 to 7 interior defensive lineman in the league. Jawan Bentley is a good player, great run stopper, okay in pass coverage, but he's a good player. But these issues go beyond just not having those two
It's not
guys.
just missing those two
Like
guys.
that's the thing. If you just were having some trouble
And
tackling,
Peppers, you're missing Peppers, so it's really three
Yeah.
guys. But
sure.
but I agree with you. It runs deeper than that.
And let's even include Peppers, who's a good player, right? Okay, but if you were telling me that, okay, they were just having some trouble generating pressure on pass rushes up the middle, or they were having some trouble at the second level with some tackling and short yardage runs where Bentley would have, made a big difference, then I could understand that. But they're getting pushed around up front. Outside of Devon Godshaw, they're getting pushed around up front. They're getting gashed completely in the run game. You said it correctly. Unless they blitz, they're not generating any pressure. I mean, what happened to Josh Uche, who had 10 sacks down the stretch 2 years ago, another good sack year last year, decided to stay to play for Mayo? I mean, no pressure generated from him at all. Keon White, really the most notable thing he's done in the past month is those back-to-back 15-yard penalties against Miami. I hate to say it, but
he is not the player, at least so far this season. He's not the player we thought he was going to be.
No, I agree completely. And then at the linebacking level, I think Jelani Tavai is showing us that he's a role player that looks okay next to Jawan Bentley, but he's not meant for an elevated role, which he's had. Christian Ellis, decent player, but he's more of a special teamer. Like, this goes beyond just, hey, Barmore and Bentley are out. Like, they're getting pushed around. It feels like their angles are off. They're letting guys get open too. Like, it just feels, and the lack of pressure too, just feels like one-on-one battles are being consistently lost. So, I mean, it might be a Covington thing. Maybe the roster on defense is not as good as we thought it was. Maybe it's a mix, but it just, to me, this goes beyond those couple guys injured and Peppers out. And I'm not diminishing those guys as players. They're good players, and Barmore's a great one. But, 41 points last week, 25 defensively surrendered today. Jets did whatever they wanted against you. 49ers did whatever they wanted against you. Like, that, to me, it goes beyond just those injuries.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartely with that. Good friend of the show, Lauren Gaudette, checks in. She's old reliable when it comes to our post-game show. I just have no words. There's nothing to say that Pats did anything well. I didn't like the end of the first half with 3 timeouts and no attempt to do a 2-minute drill with your rookie. Coaching's a problem. Thank you for checking in, Lauren. We appreciate you as always. And I agree with you. And I think that to a degree, John, I think that coaching is a problem. Okay. Yeah. And I think, look, we knew that they were going to have some growing pains with Mayo. But situational coaching has been a problem for this team all year. It continues to be an issue. That situation there is one example today. The other thing is, at the end of the game, why not kick the extra point there, make it an 8-point game? Now you're within a score potentially. Again, I don't understand the thought process there. The situational coaching, I think it's overthinking things. I think they're so desperate to try to right the ship that they're overthinking things in some of these situations. But to go back to the defense, and this is a broader conversation about coaching, again, Belichick is gone, but you don't have that veteran voice on that side of the ball that's been around the league a long time that can kind of you don't have a Ben McAdoo. I said this in the spring. I said, it's great that you hired McAdoo to kind of help oversee the offense, but you needed that guy on defense too. Even though you retained Pellegrino and you retained Belichick, and you kept a couple of the lower level guys, and yes, you did bring in some new guys with Jerry Montgomery and Wilkins. The reality is you needed kind of a veteran overseer, a guy that's been around the league for a long time, that's been a coordinator, that knows how to defend teams and has a book on teams and coaches. They don't have that guy. And yes, you kept a lot of the same system in place, and Covington is running that system. But I think the lack of a veteran voice on that side of the ball is starting to show up here.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point. And you look at the coaching today, like the 2-point conversion thing, I actually agreed with that move. I would have gone for two there. I think the problem was is you gave up an 8-play drive right after, and then you turned it over on downs in 5 plays. On both sides of the ball, you mentioned the voice to have there. It feels like offensively, they're pretty good those first 10 to 15 scripted plays. Like they went right down and scored a touchdown today. They looked okay. I mean, I know May threw the interception on his first drive against Houston, but they looked at least competent early in that game outside of that overthrow. But then it feels like once they get beyond that, they don't have a lot of answers and a lot of adjustments on the offensive side of the ball. And then defensively, I think you bring up an interesting point because I'm a Covington supporter. I thought he was probably the only coordinator that was their first choice that they actually hired, right? We know Van Pelt wasn't their first choice. We know Springer wasn't their first choice. And I think Covington can be a good coach, but I think you're seeing some of the inexperience. Remember the Jets game where they were bringing pressure constantly and it took them until late in the second quarter to adjust when it wasn't working, or even today where they kept getting gashed, and it felt like they weren't adjusting to it. Like maybe that's where a veteran defensive line or linebackers coach who's been in the league a long time would say, hey, let's do this. Let's get ahead of this. And then Covington can learn from that because look, Donta Hightower was a brilliant player, and I think he could be a good coach, but he's a rookie coach coaching the linebackers, right? Like there are other coaches, Brian Belichick and Mike Pellegrino are good, but they're specialists, right? They work with the safeties, they work with the corners, they're specialists. So I mean, I think they are lacking that veteran voice. And even in years past, if they didn't have that veteran voice on defense, well, you always had the head coach in Bill Belichick that was that veteran voice. Now you have the inexperienced head coach. You don't have that veteran voice on defense. And I think maybe that's kind of adding up there. Again, it feels to me like the slowness to adjust is offensively and defensively. We've been talking about it for a while, but that's a coaching issue. And I think some of the little things like Hunter Henry now, multiple games with, hurtful pre-snap penalties. That's a captain of your team. Jalen Polk looks all out of sorts, and some of that I think is coaching and concentration. And so it just seems like some of the little things are adding up to them not being a good. Again, take the talent disparity out of it. They're not doing a lot of the little things right, and they seem slow to adjust.
And Lauren checks back in. We're all coaches and been in these situations. Why not coach the future and coach up the culture and standards? Just a huge whiff by the coaches right now. It's the NFL. I mean, look, with all due respect, I don't think Patriot fans don't give a shit about the culture and the standards. They just don't. We have to be realistic here. It's a business. So we can talk about culture and standards all we want. But at the end of the day, and I'm not attacking Lauren here, I'm just being honest, it's a business. At the levels we've coached at, I think there's more of an onus on culture, standards, accountability, building the program more organically. In the NFL, where your roster is turned over so much on a year-to-year basis, I mean, grown men who are getting paid more than you, that are getting paid millions of dollars, they don't want to hear you as their coach continue to talk about culture and standards. Coach speak only gets you so far. It's a results-driven league, like any professional sports league. I think at the end of the day, what it comes down to is there's a genuine lack of talent there. Yeah. They look like a staff that's young, especially Mayo. The decision-making has not been good at the top. You can debate whether going for two or not was the right idea. I think it is a debatable point. As you said, John, you agreed with it. I think a lot of people jumped on that decision too quick. I'm not sure I agreed with that either. It wouldn't have mattered at that point. But I just think at the end of the day, they need to restack the chairs on the deck here. This roster's not very good. And you're 1-6. You've lost 6 in a row. Their worst losing streak since 1993. That's the pre-Bob Kraft era. They haven't lost 6 in a row since Drew Bledsoe's rookie year. So think about that for a sec. Let that sink in. That illustrates just how bad things are there right now. And you know what? It's not that I woke up on this beautiful Sunday morning and I put on my negative pants. This is a reality check that I think all of New Englanders and Patriot fans need to face. They're going to be down for a while. Even though the NFL is a league of quick fixes and you can turn your fortunes around in one offseason, as we've seen in recent years, John, it's not as easy to do that anymore. It does tend to take longer now to fix teams and fix rosters. They're not, even though they're going to have a good amount of cap space next year and they're going to have high draft choices, it's still not going to be enough. It's probably going to take another 2 years to get this roster to a place where this is a playoff team and potentially competing for something more than just getting in. It's today, I think, was an illustration of that. I think you hit the nail on the head. And the other problem is your I don't want to call them elite level players because I don't know if they have any of those guys. But look at Christian Gonzalez. I think we all agree. Good pick last year.
Yeah.
Good player, has a lot of upside, has a lot of the physical traits that defensive coaches look for around the league now. The length, the athleticism, the ball skills. He has struggled the last 2 weeks. He struggled last week against Stephon Diggs. He struggled today against rookie Brian Thomas out of LSU. And that was one of our key matchups in our matchup preview. That was the number one matchup. They needed to win that matchup because Lawrence has been looking to Thomas exclusively for most of the season. Gabe Davis, Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram have been non-factors for them so far this season. So the thing is, even your so-called good players, they're not winning their matchups either. And when that's happening, and you don't have many of them to begin with, then your record's gonna reflect what you are. And what you are right now is a bad football team.
Yeah, and it's one of those things too, right? Like when the few good players, like you said, that you have don't play well and you don't have any depth behind them to recover, you give up 32
Yeah,
points
you
total,
can
right?
bench Raekwon McMillan, but
You're
as
gonna
you
bench
said earlier,
Christian
your
Gonzalez.
alternative is Christian Ellis, who's a special teamer. It's not a knock on
Right.
him, but that's the reality of what he is in this league.
Yeah, and I think the thing about the Patriots too, when you look at their overall build, I think the teams that turn it around quicker either have a veteran roster with a young coach or a veteran coaching staff with a young roster. They've gone largely youth in both phases, right? They have a lot of young coaches, newer coaches, and they have a lot of first and second and third year contributors on the roster. So it might take a little longer. And like the Houston Texans example is interesting to me because on the surface, right? They draft CJ Stroud, they hire D'Amico Ryans, boom, they're in the divisional round all of a sudden. I think what gets lost in that is they had been building for 2 or 3 years before that to get the roster around, including good players on defense, Laramie Tunsil and other pieces on offense, right? So, yeah, Ryans and Stroud were probably the biggest catalyst to that turnaround. But I think those two guys came into a better situation than what the Patriots have right now. You can even look at Caleb Williams in Chicago, right?
Oh
Goes in
yeah.
Jaden Daniels in Washington, which
But that, and I'll say this: I don't think Jaden Daniels is in that much better of a situation than Drake May, talent wise. He's
I
got
think
Terry
he's
McLaurin.
So I think he's in a better situation for two reasons. A, Cliff Kingsbury is a much better offensive coach than anyone the Patriots have because we all remember him as the failed Cardinals head coach, but offensively, he's pretty good. And with quarterbacks, he's pretty good. And then, yeah, Terry McLaurin is a better piece than anyone on the Patriots have. Also, Washington, correct me if I'm wrong, they signed, I think, 2, maybe 3 new offensive line starters this offseason, which have actually played reasonably well for them. So I'm not saying it's a light years better situation, but I think it's a better situation. And I think on top of it, Daniels is a more talented player who is more pro ready. So you put that together and they're better off. Whereas with the Patriots, I mean, and even in Washington, Dan Quinn's been a head coach who went to a Super Bowl before. Like that's a lot different than a guy who's only
Well,
been
that's
coaching
what I
for
was
5
going to
years.
say. My point, I don't think it's that much better, but where it is better is the coaching. Like you said, Quinn's he's been a Super Bowl head coach before. Cliff Kingsbury rather has been a head coach. He's been an offensive coordinator. I'm not sure he's the innovator that everybody thinks he is, and chances are he's probably going to get another shot this offseason. I'm not a big Kingsbury guy. I don't think
But I'd take him
that's
over Van Pelt. Like
right.
working with a young quarterback, I would take him over Van Pelt.
Which is fine, but he's an air raid guy, and I have my questions if you can win with that system in the NFL long term. And he's, to his credit, I'll give Kingsbury credit for one thing. He has adjusted and adapted to the NFL game, just like Chip Kelly had to do when he came into the league. That you can't be a pure air raid or pure spread offense and win in the NFL. You're going to have to blend conceptually, and he's done that. So I give him credit for that. But I do think outside of McLaurin, they added Luval Wagner on defense. Those guys are pretty good linebackers, certainly better than anybody than the Patriots have. But outside of those guys and Daniels being more pro-ready, I don't think offensive line-wise they're that much better than the Patriots. I don't think that secondary-wise they're better than the Patriots. I don't think they're that much further along. But I do think, to your point, what it illustrates is the importance of experience in terms of your coaching. Having a playmaker on offense, bringing in veterans that can fit in and help bring your young guys along. Patriots didn't do enough of that. And no disrespect to KJ Osborne and some of, Antonio Gibson and some of the veterans that they brought in, but these are not impact veterans. These are not guys, yeah, they may be leaders in the room and they may show your young guys how to be pros, but they're not impact veterans. Antonio Gibson, I think, has the potential to. Unfortunately, in this system, I don't think he can be the player he is. But KJ Osborne, let's be real here. And this is not a knock on KJ. Seems like a nice guy. He's done a nice guy being a leader, or he's done a nice job, I should say, being a leader. But he wasn't going to be an impact piece for them. And I think that's the problem here and again, this is the other issue, right? Belichick and Brady are gone. Guys don't want to take your money. They don't want to come to this situation. It's a true rebuild with a young quarterback in New England, high taxes, cold weather. It's not an attractive situation. The days where guys wanted to play here, as we've said all along, those days are long over.
Yeah, I agree. Because look, when you're trying to get free agents, trying to get guys to agree to a trade to come to you, there's really two things generally that attract a guy: winning and money. You're not winning, and if the money is similar, like Brandon Ayuk's a good example. So San Fran offered him a little less money than you, but it was reasonably close, and that's a much better situation. He's already there, so he stayed. Like it's not surprising to me. And Calvin Ridley, who I think
that's been a
he got he got overpaid anyway. But point being, well, Tennessee and New England both aren't winning, and the money in Tennessee is a little better, so he went there, right?
And so state taxes, better weather.
Yeah, exactly. So that's
New England has to offer any day of the week to players,
and that's why. And we've talked about this a little bit. As soon as Drake May started last week, I think the clock started ticking on Elliott Wolf, for better or worse, because if you're going to be good and you're going to get better quicker, it's going to have to be through this past spring's draft in this coming year's draft. That's what's going to be your fastest way. And look, maybe you can sign T. Higgins, maybe you can trade for DK Metcalf, and that'll help. But that's only one player. The fastest way for them to get better, based off what we've talked about, is to hit on those drafts. Jalen Polk doesn't look good. Caden Wallace doesn't look good. I know it's early, but those guys have to be part of this. Javon Baker can't even get on the field. Those guys have to be part of this if this team is going to turn it around, or they're going to be in like a 4-year rebuild.
Well, the other thing to keep in mind too is that you have Drake May on his rookie contract.
Yeah, that's another huge piece
of that. This is the time to build the roster around him. This is the time to spend in free agency because you can afford to do it. Because eventually, if he becomes what we hope he becomes, you're going to have to pay him. And he's probably going to be pushing. By the time you have to pay him, $50 million a year is not going to be out of the question.
That's what I was going to say, 50.
If he becomes what we hope he becomes, and it appears through 7 weeks that Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May looks like they're going to be the next great quarterback class in the league. If those guys develop, and let's say if Bo Nix continues to do what he's doing in Denver, now this class is going to rival 2020. Those guys have gotten paid already. You got to pay these guys, because if you don't, you're going to obviously lose them. So you want to capitalize on that short 3-4 year window that you have with May on his rookie deal, because once you have to pay him, it's going to be harder to put a team around him.
Yeah, I mean, I think the best example is the 2018 Rams. And I know they didn't win the Super Bowl, but they had Goff on that kind of affordable contract early. They built a lot of pieces around him, and all of a sudden they're in the Super Bowl. And some of those guys that were left over helped them win a Super Bowl 2 years later in 2021. So, yeah, that's a piece of it too, the May rookie contract. But I think, like, at this point, you just got to kind of figure out, like, Jalen Polk not playing well at all. And Javon Baker,
a huge disappointment.
Like
that there was some statistic at the beginning of the game. Chris Rose mentioned that he's only caught 10 of his 24 targets.
Yeah, right. Less
this
than
is a guy who had some of the best hands in that class last year. It has been a major struggle for him.
Yeah, and like I said about Baker too, like he can't get on the field at all. Like these are.
And what's going on there though? Why can't he get on the field? I would love to know why he's not playing.
Yeah, and I think you and I talked about this in training camp about, was Baker going to be that guy that popped a few times at camp with really good catches but couldn't do the little things right consistently to get on the field? And I kind of wonder if that's what's happening. Because I look at this receiver core, and as poorly as Polk has played, and Bourne was out the first 5 weeks of the
Total
year,
non-factor. He's only been
like
back a couple weeks, but
like
he's just happy to be there
yeah,
collecting a check. And I'm not knocking KB. I'm just saying, get the guy more involved.
yeah. And like Tyquan Thornton has given you nothing. Like it's just with all those things
Connected
moving,
yet.
all those things moving around, like Baker can't get on the field. Like to me, that's a red flag right there. It'd be one thing if their top receiver group was all playing well, but they're not. I mean, outside of Pop Douglas, their receiver group really hasn't played well at all this year. And yet Baker, not only can he not be in the, he can't even be active every week. He can't even get a snap here or there when he is active. I mean, that to me, that is a concern. And that's why I mentioned, like, I'm not trying to be hyperbolic here. I'm not saying he's going anywhere, but as soon as Drake May started last week, clock starts on Elliott Wolf for better or worse, because the quickest way for them to get better is for Polk to be good, for Caden Wallace to be good, for Javon Baker to at least be a spot contributor, and of course, for Drake May to be good. And as soon as you put May in, that starts the clock. And I think next year's draft is going to be maybe not
Huge,
as important as getting May, but not
huge.
that far behind.
I think it's huge for them because
Yeah.
now that's the draft where they got to put the pieces around
Yeah.
him. That's the draft where they got to fortify the defense. And yes, it wasn't as important as getting him last year, but it's
Very
a
close.
notch below.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Because now it's how do you rebuild that offensive line? What do you do to add to that receiving core? Of course, some of those questions could be answered leading up to the draft through free agency.
Yeah.
But again, I can't envision them landing a big fish unless they grossly overpay for it.
And I think
That's
this
the
is
reality.
something
Be
we
nice to
talked
get a Ronnie Stanley. He's going to be the preeminent free agent at left tackle, but I would imagine Baltimore will probably franchise him, so he might not even hit the market.
and you and I talked about this a lot last year, and I think this was a mistake they made in the offseason is they went into the offseason with a clear need at quarterback, a clear need at tackle, and a clear need at receiver. And we said the whole time, can you go into the draft with one of those things figured out? So then you only have to really target two of those things. They went into the draft with none of those figured out. So they went quarterback early, they went receiver right after early. So tackle got kind of pushed to the back burner. Now going into this offseason, you're probably still going to have a need at receiver. You're going to have a need at linebacker. You're going to have a need at tackle. You may even have a need at tight end. Can you go into the draft only needing two of those things? So, because again, that I think was a mistake they made last year. So then by the time they got to pick Caden Wallace, and nothing against him personally, I think he's got some potential, but I mean, that's a fourth round pick. That's not a guy you target high with a lot of great talents to play left tackle, right? He's a right tackle. So that to me is when you look forward going into this, and that's also what they got to figure out in the next 10 games. How big is this need at receiver? How big is this need at linebacker? How big is this need, whether it's at corner, at tight end, at these other non-tackle spots? Because I really think you need to go into the draft. To me, you need to go into the draft only needing two of those things and having the rest solved before then. Otherwise, then it's just a vicious cycle where then the next year you go in needing more and more.
Yeah, and you're not capitalizing on the number one thing you need to capitalize in this league, which is a rookie quarterback on that first-year contract, like we said earlier. I mean, look, when you look at today's game, that's what it comes down to. Jacksonville has underachieved. That's a good football team on paper. It's a well-built,
Super Bowl winning coach,
football team. And one thing you could say about Shad Khan, he spends money in free agency. Every single year, they're spending money. They go on, they get Gabe Davis. They go on, they get Mitch Morse. They go on, they get Eric Armstead. They were loading for bear this year. They felt that they could contend in the AFC. And going into the season, honestly, if you would ask me who's a sleeper Super Bowl contender in the AFC, I might have actually picked them based on the composition of the roster. But it shouldn't be that much of a surprise to us that the Patriots lost today. I think the bigger issue here is the way they're losing games. You're not a very good football team. You're probably at best a 3-14 team, maybe 4-13 again. But it's the way they're losing, John. It's
not competitive at times.
Right. And I don't want to start the stupid quit talk because it drives me up a wall because people love to jump on that, especially people that haven't been in the game. But I don't think that they're quitting on him. And I'm not sure that they're even going to quit on him. But the concerning thing is you're starting to see the body language isn't good. As soon as something bad happens, the floodgates open. They don't have the ability to recover. Once Jacksonville went up 14-10, in my head, I'm thinking this game's over. This isn't hoops. There's no 10-0 runs in football. It's hard to get momentum back. There's no way they're going to get momentum back here. As good as Drake May is, and as much as he's going to keep them in this game, I didn't think that they were going to get it back. And I do think the other thing to keep in mind here as we wrap up this week's show is as we go along here, obviously come this offseason, there's going to be some changes. Excuse me, because there's going to be pressure on Mayo and ownership to make some changes. Where those changes lie, and I think the last 9-10 games here is an audition for Alex Van Pelt. He's got to prove that he can hold on to this job. And his ability to be the offensive coordinator here next year, I think, is going to solely depend on the continued development of Drake May and the production of the offense. If Drake May regresses at any point, and even if he stays even and he's not progressing, I think you could see a coordinator change.
Yeah, I don't think it's outside of the realm of possibility.
And by the way, not to cut you off, I don't like talking about people's job security.
Me neither.
I can't stand that. And I think Van Pelt is a good man and a good coach. I'm just saying, hypothetically, his time here is solely going to depend on how Drake May's progressing the rest of this season.
Yeah, and we talked early in the show, right, about the little things. I think that's what you got to watch too, especially from a coaching staff perspective, because the question to ask, are they as dialed in and buttoned down as they need to be? The pre-snap penalties, the missed tackles, the missed blocks, the drops, all those things are little pieces of evidence of maybe not as dialed in, right? Or maybe not as buttoned down. Is the focus level really there, right? Like all those things add up, right? Situational mismanagement, situational football misexecution, for lack of a better term. Like all those things add up. And yes, part of it is your roster's not good, right? If your offensive linemen were better, they wouldn't need to hold as much. Okay. Yeah, sure. But when you add it all up, that's when you start looking at the leaders on the team, the coaching staff, the profile of player the front office is bringing in. Is it the right thing? So you look at 10 games left here, you're 1-6. What can you figure out? I think there's a lot to figure out because it's who is really part of this core going forward. Who did they think was part of the core and isn't? And is the coaching staff able to progress? You got a lot of new faces, a lot of rookie coaches and positions. Are those guys progressing? Or are we going to sit here next August and say they have 3 or 4 new coaches on the staff, 12 different new players at key positions? Are we going to be saying that? And I think that over these last 10 weeks, something to keep our eyes on.
I agree wholeheartedly. And that goes back to the point that I made earlier about not having that veteran coach on defense who's been around, who's been a coordinator, who's had to defend some of these systems and coaches, not having that veteran voice on that side of the ball starting to show up now. And this is not a knock on DeMarcus Covington or the guys that were here under Belichick or the new guys that have come in. But I do think that's important. And I think that they leaned too much on the system. They leaned too much on their previous experience on that side of the ball. And now I think you're starting to see that that was a mistake, that they could have used someone who could have come in, even if it's someone that had previously coached under Belichick somewhere down the line with the Patriots. Even if you bring someone back like that in a senior defensive assistant role, someone that could sit down with the defensive staff and say, hey, look, our run fits are terrible, which they were awful today. Awful.
They have been for a while.
Awful against the run. I mean, it is bad. The defensive line doesn't reestablish the line of scrimmage at all. Go back and watch. There were probably 4 or 5 runs today where Tank Bigsby was in the second level before you even blinked for a second time after watching him take the handoff. I mean, that's where it starts. If your defensive line can't stack and shed and reestablish the line of scrimmage, your linebackers are taking on second-level blockers. Now they're in a tough spot, and now you're asking your safeties to get involved in core run support. That is hard. And the run fits have been bad. The pursuit angles have been bad now for 3 years, really. They really do not pursue well as a team collectively. And then in the secondary, you see it on Brian Thomas's touchdown. They're trying to match. They don't communicate. They're trying to play it in and out. He goes in, catches it, walks in. It is what it is. they've got a lot to fix on defense. And again, not to belabor the point, I do think that's where a veteran voice, not saying that it solves all their problems, because believe me, they have a lot of problems, but it certainly would have helped. So we shall see. New York Jets come to town next Sunday. The New York Jets with Devontae Adams, of course, who was traded there earlier this week. Report came out yesterday that they could potentially be shopping Garrett Wilson. I think that is absurd. It's too bad that they're in the same division, because that's a guy that you target and try to trade for. He might be worth giving up a second-round pick, because that could be the number one receiver you need, but not going to happen. Pipe dream. Nonetheless, I digress. All right, John, final thoughts here before we wrap it up.
Yeah, final thoughts. I mean, you look forward, you have the Jets, you have the Titans coming up, and you look at the rest of the schedule, and not to be
that Chicago game probably looks like a loss.
not to be doom
They
and
look like
gloom,
a playoff team.
but yeah, not to be doom and gloom, but if they continue to play this way, maybe they only win 1 or 2 more games the rest of the year. Just again, I mean, they can turn it around and play more competitively. That's possible.
But let me ask you this: where are those wins, though?
Yeah, I look at Tennessee and Arizona. Those are the 2 games that I'm like, all right, those 2 teams I just don't have a lot of faith in. I actually think the Patriots, talent-wise, are in the neighborhood of those teams. You know, more so Tennessee than Arizona. But it's just, again, you look at the Jets. Normally, a team that fires their head coach after 5 weeks and is coming to your house, you'd think, oh, that's a winnable game. I mean, it doesn't feel that way after the way they've played the last few weeks.
No, I think if you had asked me 2 weeks ago, you know, if you looked at it objectively, you said to yourself, this is a spot. Remember last year we talked a lot about this is a spot where they could do this, and this is a spot where they could do that. I think when I started thinking about potential spots, I thought, all right, you're going to play Jacksonville in London. They're a mess, potential winnable game. Now the Jets fire Robbie Saleh. That could be a potential, winnable game. I mean, Rodgers has not played great, but now all of a sudden, look, Drake May's going to keep you in games, but if this defense doesn't get their act together, if they don't figure out a way to be more consistent on offense, if guys like Michael Onwenu don't play up to their contract, and yes, I'm singling him out because he
hasn't played that well recently.
He has not played well. You gave him 3 years at $57 million, and in his defense, he's bounced back and forth from right guard to right tackle, and they haven't, unfortunately, they're not doing him any favors with the way they're using him either, but guys like that need to step up. The guys that got paid need to look in the mirror, John. Yeah. The guys that got paid this season that are going to be key pieces, they need to step up.
It's been a while since Kyle Duggar or Ramondre Stevenson or Mike Onwenu has given you an impact play, and those are guys they re-signed for a lot of money. And I think they're good players, don't get me wrong, but it's been a while since we've seen one of those guys give you a game-changing type impact play.
Yeah, I agree. They better start doing it because this season is certainly slipping fast. All right. That'll do it for this week's episode of the Patriots postgame show. Again, I want to thank my partner. We're back together after a week off. I want to thank my partner, WEI's John Lyons. And, of course, you can catch John on WEI throughout the week. Follow him along on Twitter at @TheRealJohnLyons, and he will give you updates when he is on there. And hopefully you and I will get a chance to reconnect on there as well in the near future. But, John, always great talking Patriots with you, my friend, and let's do this again next week.
Yeah, for the first time, John, in all our years together, I'm almost a little scared to talk football next week after the game. So we'll see how it goes. Maybe they'll bounce back, but we'll see.
Yeah, I'm beginning to enter the realm of no hope here. But nonetheless, we chug along. That'll do it for this week's episode of Patriots Post-Game Show. Again, Patriots lose the Jacksonville Jaguars in jolly old England, 32-16. For John Lyons, I'm John Serenitas. Till next week, peace.